All right, so on our handout in front of us, we have a handout called Chapter 21, East Asia and Europe. And today what we're going to be talking about is how Europeans are interacting with East Asia in particular. Now, we've talked about Asia recently, but a lot of our focus has been on India, which we refer to as South Asia. But if we were going to be talking about East Asia, there's two countries that are the most important politically and culturally in East Asia. What are those two then and today? Yeah, China and Japan, right? And so we're going to be talking about what happens when Europeans are interested in going to China and they're interested in going into Japan. So this map on the screen is actually looking at the world back a couple hundred years ago. And this map has some information we should be able to identify. In fact, Tomas is going to identify for me what country, what power controls everything in red. The Spanish, right? Now, that should be a super simple question, but honestly, you're the first person to answer this. As I've thrown out that question, it's been a lot of uncertainty. People have said, how would I even know? I pointed to some of these countries, said, well, what country is this? And people had no idea what country this was. So that's Mexico, if you don't know. This is Latin America. And one way that you should know this is, what's the language spoken pretty much everything here? Spanish, right? And in addition, what's the religion of the average person you meet from Peru, El Salvador, Argentina? Catholic, right? Typically, when you get beat up by someone, they give you two things. They give you their language and they give you their religion. And the Spanish did that, in fact. So the Spanish own everything in red, and that's awesome and that's great. But then there's this other power on the map, and they own everything in blue. And I don't know if you can see super clearly, but everything in blue entails not like a huge chunks of empire like the Spanish, but everything in blue is like these dots, these cities, these coastal establishments in blue. Who is that? Who has all this in blue, and why don't they have a huge empire like Spain? Who is that in blue? The Portuguese. So why don't they have a huge physical empire, Isabella, like the Spanish? Yeah, they do have really just the ports, but why? Why don't they decide to do to Africa what the Spanish did to South America? Like, why don't they? I mean, that seems kind of cool that they have like 2/3 of South America, 3/4 of, why don't they do that to Africa and India? Why weren't the Portuguese able to full on take over Africa and full on take over India? Okay. Well, let's go back to America real quick. Anthony, when you look at the Americas, there were some things that allowed an staffed Spanish army. There was something that they had going for them. Four things, actually, that allowed the Spanish to take over vast amounts, millions of acres of land in North and South America. What are some things that the Spanish had in their favor? Four things that we've talked about regularly when we describe this. What are things that made it easier for the Spanish to take over all that land? What's that? They had horses. That's one. They had guns. That's two. Two more things that the Spanish had, Native Americans did not have. They had steel. That's a third thing. One more. And the biggest thing. Yeah, they had germs. So we have these guns, germs, steel, and horses. And that pretty much allowed the Spanish to take over huge portions of North and South America, because anytime 90% of the people of an area die, I mean, how easy is it for me to take over? But what about when white people get to Africa? I mean, here it looks like, as Isabella correctly pointed out, that they just really have like the ports. Well, how come 90% of Africans don't die? How come when they get to India, 90% of Indians don't die from disease? What's the deal with disease and places like Africa and India and Europe? they're used to it. We have studied something called the Silk Road, where disease has already moved from China across the Silk Road, and we already had the Black Death. They're sharing diseases across the Silk Road. We've talked about the Indian Ocean Trade Network. India is connected to Africa. We've talked about the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. Sub-Saharan Africa connected to North Africa, which is connected to Europe. So they've been sharing disease for thousands of years. There's nothing new a white person is showing up to India and Africa with that's going to wipe out India. Now, when it does come to disease, though, what group of people is likely to contract the disease and die if there's an interaction between a white European and black Africans? Why? What specific disease are we talking about? Malaria. And that's one of the reasons why white Europeans say, you know what, we're just going to stay along the coast, because it turns out when white Europeans get to Africa, the more they go inland, the more that they get exposed to inland conditions, they get bit by mosquitoes that carry malaria and they die. So the Portuguese, they don't have that advantage of disease that we saw in the Columbian Exchange, but there is something the Portuguese have that make them powerful. There's something the Portuguese have that make them wealthy and able to take over cities. What do the Portuguese have that's pretty good technologically? They have guns. They have like some of the best guns in the world. It's not that the Ottomans and the Mughals didn't have guns, just their guns weren't as good. One reason we've studied this already is that Europe went through something called the scientific revolution. And if I'm like getting better at physics, physics, how does that deal with the army? Well, I've got better cannon and better abilities. And so the Portuguese got great guns, and they're able to take over all these dotted parts of the map. But now we need to talk about not South Asia, but East Asia. What about China? What about Japan? So looking in the handout, it says, first of all, where it says Asia and Europe, in the 1700s, European merchants started trade networks in East Asia. So once we get to the 1700s, Europeans are now casting their eye to China and casting their eye to Japan. These are countries they want to really get to know more. I mean, we got to know India and so much great stuff from India. We get spices from India. We get great material from India. So we've been doing business, Europeans argued, with India for a while, but now Europeans want to do business with China. Now, what's China been up to while Europeans have been doing their thing? On the second line, it says China was in need of silver for its tax system. As China is a growing economy, they need some valuable metals to back up their money. What's going to happen if you just like print out money and there's nothing to back it up, nothing to give it value? What's going to happen to your money if you're just printing out money? It's going to lose its value. What's going to happen to prices? And what we call that phenomenon, what? We call that inflation. So that's something China wants to be really cautious of. And because of that, they want to get access to silver. So there's something real backing up their money. And they got most of that silver for its tax system from Japan. Japan was in a trade relationship with China, and they provided a lot of that silver. But you might remember that in world history, from the 1500s on, there is a new big source of silver globally. In fact, there's so much new silver that it's flooding the markets and causing not just local inflation, but global inflation. In fact, one of the countries where this comes from had so much silver that the country's name comes from the name silver. What part of the world is that? What's on the periodic table? What's silver? No. It's so the periodic table. It's what? Ag, right? And that Au's gold. Ag silver. Argentina is named after the Latin word for silver because there's so much silver in Argentina and South America, it causes global inflation. We've actually discussed this before. So it says on the third line, later Spanish silver from the Americas would pour into China. And that's going to cause problems, Way back when we talked about this guy West African guy named Mansa Musa, and we mentioned that Mansa Musa, the richest black man who ever lived up to that time, he went on a trip from Timbuktu to Mecca, and he gave away gold gifts everywhere he went. He gave away so much gold it caused inflation, or gold actually became less valuable. Well, that's what happens globally. They get so much silver out of Argentina and other locales that the global value of silver actually goes down. And so that's going to be a challenge and a problem. So later, Spanish silver from the Americas would pour into China. So now that we kind of have just a little bit of the background, there's two types of white Europeans that are going to be the first to get to China. The first group of white people are going to be business people, and the second group of people are going to be religious leaders. And these are like the real reasons that white Europeans want to go to China. I want to make a buck in China, or I want to tell people about baby Jesus in China. Like those are like the two main reasons. So on the next section where it says trading companies and missionaries, it says the Chinese were reluctant to openly embrace Europeans. And we actually know something about Chinese culture that would explain why they were reluctant to embrace Europeans. How did Chinese feel about non-Chinese people in general? Yeah, they didn't like them. There's a word for this. We call that being ethnocentric. That's like when you put your ethnic group like above all others and you think that you're the best. In fact, China's nickname for themselves in America, like a nickname from like if you listen to the Star Spangled Banner, our national anthem, says that we're the home of the brave, land of the free, home of the brave, all that kind of good stuff. There's a nickname China has for themselves. They call themselves the Middle Kingdom because they believe of all the countries on planet Earth, they're the most important. And so the average Chinese upper class person, if you ask them, hey, what do you think about India? Well, India's like a pretty advanced place. Like they have mathematics, they have all these wealth and advances. Chinese people thought India's trash. And if you ask China, hey, what do you think about these white people? They're like, yeah, even more trash than the Indians. At least Indians have decent math, like these white people, what do they have? I mean, you might remember when the Portuguese got to India, what do white Europeans have to bring to India that an Indian would want? I mean, can you list anything Europe has that anyone would want? I mean, Europe kind of sucks so bad that they had to go thousands of miles to get pepper. Like if you're super stoked and excited about pepper, what does your kitchen look like? Like if that's like oh my God, I can't believe we got pepper. Oh, this is the best day ever. Okay, Europe, like I think you're struggling, right? They didn't have cotton, they didn't have pepper, they didn't have sugar, they didn't have paper with regularity. So Europe is not a place China has a large amount of respect for. So they're not really interested in Europeans. Plus, what kind of reputation do white Europeans have? According to this map, what do Europeans tend to want to do when they get to somewhere new? Take it over, right? So the Chinese are like, look, you guys are a trash culture. You guys are kind of a violent culture. Like everywhere you guys go, you like try to build an empire and you don't even have anything good. I'm happy to take your money, but there's nothing I really want from you. Portugal, it says on the handout, was only allowed to trade from coastal cities. From coastal cities. So, for example, here's China, and the Chinese felt super uncomfortable with the Europeans just being able to come into China. Like even today in 2021, there's a growing crisis in the United States regarding migrants. If you've turned on a television in the last 2 weeks, there's like a huge crisis. Okay, that's shocking. So on our southern border, we have the most people flooding into our country in 20 years. There's never been a higher number. And the main group of people coming in are unaccompanied minors. So kids from Guatemala, like parents are sending their 7-year-old kid in Guatemala or El Salvador across Mexico by themselves or with a coyote, which is like a man you pay money to get you across the border. It's super sketchy and dangerous. About 1/3 of all girls who go are raped by the coyotes. So these people are paid to bring you in, but they often like rape you and sexually assault you. What's that? What? Okay, IG, you're not even supposed to be listening right now. You're supposed to be writing. But anyway, it's terrible. It's a crisis. And like, I don't know if you've seen they have kids packed in like, has none of you seen these things? Wow, this is great. I mean, we should probably. Okay, so it turns out that it's terrible, and they are crowded into these conditions. I think these shelters that these you have to put these kids somewhere. I think they're at 1,000% capacity, which means they're like several times above capacity. They don't have blankets. Like, you know, like when you see movies, there's like a disaster and like give you like these foil blankets to keep you warm. Like I don't know if you can like imagine that in your head. Like they look like foil, and that's what these kids have to sleep on. They're sleeping on the floor. They're sleeping on concrete benches. What's up? Well, they say they're not cages, but if you look at it, like you would not want, and we'll look at some of this tomorrow. You wouldn't want anyone you know. Thousands of kids are in these conditions, and there's more people coming, and it's a terrible situation, right? Like because they just keep coming in. There's no room for these children. So well, that's why a lot of them are, when you interview the Central Americans, they're like, oh, we came because Joe Biden's president now. And they were led to believe he's going to let them all in because there is this perception that the Democratic Party is going to make them all citizens. And, you know, hey, you're here, we'll give you amnesty, you know, come on in. That's the perception. And so because of that, we have the most amount of people flooding in 20 years. It's been like way past when Obama was president before since these numbers. So it's like pretty crisis level. Like they're packed, they're sleeping on concrete floors, they're packed into these rooms. It's not good. Well, in the same way, like our border, we need to get a handle on the border. Well, China wants to get a handle on their border too. And they don't want like these white Europeans just like walking around China. So they say, okay, what we're going to do is we want to know where you guys are. We're going to actually allow you to trade. Like, where should we allow you to trade? How about that one little city that the arrow is pointed at? That's where you go, white people. You know, we want to kind of have a sense where you guys are. We don't want you just like going anywhere in China. So they really limit them. And it turns out on the handout that Spain is also interested in China as well. And Spain is actually in the neighborhood. If you look at this map in orange right here, this is an archipelago. This is a series of islands. Here it's called the Spanish East Indies. Spain actually owns those islands. And so because of that, the people who live here, the modern day country that is actually named after the King of Spain. It was named after King Philip. What modern day country is that? That's the Philippines. Philippines is kind of an interesting country because if you ever meet any Filipinos, they often have like Spanish last names. Not all the time, but some of them do. And you're like, oh, you're Mexican or you're Central American. Oh, you're from Asia. You're from the Philippines. So it's the only major Catholic country in all of Asia because pretty much the rest of the neighborhood, they are Buddhist or Hindu or Confucianist or some other Asian religion. And this is an islands of Catholics with Spanish last names. So it's kind of different. But because of the proximity, it says on the handout that the Spanish traded with China through their outpost in the Philippines, named after the King of Spain, King Philip. If you don't know how to spell it, it's Philipines. So it's like Philip Pines if you put it together. It's a double P. It's like Philip Pines. So they had an outpost in the Philippines, and as they brought silver from the Americas. So the Philippines is Spain's window to doing business with Asia. So they brought silver from the Americas. But again, Portugal wants more than being on the outside. They want to be on the inside, and they do get access. They get access to this little dot, a little city on the coast. And it says on the handout, the Portuguese were limited to the city of Macau, and I'll spell the city of Macau, that's Macao. Macau. They're actually given this city, and the Chinese say, okay, you guys can work at this city. This is your one opportunity to come and trade with us and do business with us. And I also want you to write down the years Portugal owned Macau. It says on the handout they had it from 1557. And I want you to write down all the way to when they had to give it back. They had to give it back, you'll write down on that same line, 1999. That's a long time, right? From 1557 to 1999, Portugal owned Macau, this one city on the coast of China. Here's a picture from China. And there was an earthquake in this particular location in Macau, and so that's why most of the building's not there. But if you look at this building, what's the purpose of this building? It's a church, right? It's a Catholic church. And if you look at this, you're like, oh, that could be Mexico. That could be, Venezuela. That could be Europe. This is in China because this is in Macau, this city owned by Portugal for like 500 years. And so the Portuguese are given access to this one place, Macau. Now, the Portuguese aren't the only ones interested in getting a foothold and expanding. So in this box, there's an island, and this island is super interesting for China because China wants to flex their muscles and they want to conquer an empire too. And this island has never been a part of China, but they look at it and they say, you know what, I kind of want it. And China's powerful enough to go to this island, they take it over so they can be involved with trade in the South China Sea. And this island actually is still very controversial today, because if you ask China, hey, what's up with this island in this box? Every Chinese person you know is going to say, oh, well, that's part of our country. That's part of China. It's as much part of China as New York's part of the US. But if you ask the people on that island, hey, what's your status? Are you Chinese? They'll say, heck no, we're an independent country. We have never been part of China, and we never want to be part of China. What is that island today? Yeah, that's Taiwan. We'll write down the Chinese occupied Taiwan. If you don't know how to spell it, it's Taiwan. They took over Taiwan, and they helped control regional trade in 1662 to help control trade. And that's a big controversy today. We consider Taiwan pretty much how we treat them like an independent nation. China says they're not, and China threatens them every other weekend to invade. So they're flexing their muscles too. But the most important company now that we talk about Europeans, there's corporations that decide to do business in China and in Southeast Asia because there's money. And this corporation that we need to know by name is called the VOC. And there's a lot of companies that just have abbreviations. Do you remember the name of that company 2 years ago? They blew up in Deer Park, and there was a fire that made us have a spring break that got extended because we couldn't put out the fire. What's that? ITC, right? I have no idea what ITC stands for, but that's the corporation's name. There's a computer company called IBM. They make all kinds of computer-related software and stuff like that. And this company is called VOC, and they have a symbol, just like Apple's symbol is, an apple. VOC, their symbol are these initials, and they're a Dutch company. Now, we haven't talked about the Dutch for a long time, but we've talked about them kind of recently because they're a new country, and they're important because the Dutch got rich almost overnight. And the Dutch got rich from a lot of different reasons. One reason was trade. One reason was the sugar trade. And sad to say, if you're involved with the sugar trade, what else are you involved with trading? That's not a good thing to be involved with. Slaves, right? So the Dutch, which is the Netherlands, there are new kids on the block, and they're super rich. One of the companies they own is the VOC. Now I'm going to show you the name of this company in Dutch, but because you and I don't speak Dutch, I don't want you to write down this name in Dutch, but this is what the VOC stands for. Now, I don't speak Dutch, and I don't want you to write down the Dutch name, but that's where we get VOC. And one of those words is a cognate. A cognate is a word that sounds similar in two different languages. What's the one cognate? Yeah, the last word is company, right? That's the only cognate. But I want you to write down parentheses what it means in English, and it is the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company. And this is like one of the most important corporations in history that you need to know about. In parentheses, the Dutch East India Company. And it says on your handout, they became a dominant European player in Asian trade. If you wanted to do trade in Asia, you're probably working with the VOC. They became a major player in Asian trade. And so now we have two different European countries experiencing two different things. The Philippines, Portugal used to be like super important and powerful, but they're kind of like on the decline. They used to be like super great in the 1500s, super great in the 1600s, but now Portugal is kind of like Houston professional sports today, like not that great. I think the Rockets hit a record of like losing like 20 games in a row or something like that, and it's terrible for Houston professional sports. And that's how Portugal was. Like Portugal used to be cool, used to be powerful, but they're kind of on the decline. And then you have this new kid, the Dutch, the Netherlands, and they're kind of flexing their muscles and they're becoming more powerful and more important. So if you're a newer country and you're wealthy and you're powerful and you're important, what will you want to do to a country falling apart? A country who's take over? Absolutely. And when the Dutch kind of scan the neighborhood, they settle on one part of Asia they really want to take over. They look at the map and realize if you do business in India and you want to get on a boat and get to China, or if you want to go from Japan to India, you have to actually go through this narrow piece of water here. We call narrow strips of water straits. There's like a water that separates Alaska and Russia. It's called the Bering Strait. This is called the Strait of Malacca. And sometimes we call this a choke point because if you can control this little piece of water, you can totally control trade. So like if I have to pick anywhere on this map to take over, I really like to take over this. That's exactly what the Dutch do. It says the Dutch took the Strait of Malacca away from Portugal. If you don't know how to spell it, it's on the screen. They take the Strait of Malacca away from Portugal. But all is not lost for Portugal. They still get to hold on to some parts of the Indies. And I'll show you on the second map. There's a part that the Dutch don't want. And they're like, yeah, I guess you can keep it. There's a part here called East Timor, which I literally don't know anything they produce. And so it can't be economically that important. And so it says Portugal was left with East Timor, which is on the screen. And they actually got to hold on to that area in red all the way until 1975. And so they held on for the longest time. And if you are controlled by Portugal for hundreds of years, what is that going to influence going to have again on like the religion of people of East Timor? What are they going to be? They're going to be Catholic. They remain, you'll write down, Catholic. They remain Catholic. So the VOC is in the neighborhood, and the VOC is incredibly powerful. And it says that the VOC mercilessly controlled trade, and they did so by using guns and cannon. And it says that they even executed crew members who were problems. Let's pretend I had a student who was a problem. Her initials KR. And I don't get along with her. She doesn't do her stuff. And what if she worked for the VOC? This company would literally kill people who were problems. And people are like, well, what are you going to do? They're the most powerful company on the planet. When we studied the Industrial Revolution, we saw that water pollution was a problem. And there's a company in the 20th century that has polluted American waterways. In fact, 98% of us in this room have forever chemicals in our bodies right now because of this one company that is still in business, still operates in Deer Park, still sells pans and stain-resistant carpet and windbreakers that are water-resistant. And you probably own stuff from this company that purposefully gave their employees cigarettes laced with chemicals that gave them cancer and birth deformities. And we're like, what are you going to do? Most powerful company. What company is that? It's DuPont. Like, DuPont is a major company, and you probably have pans made by DuPont or some sort of like cupcake holders. They have resulted in all of us in this room having cancer-causing forever chemicals inside our bodies right now. And most people are like, what are you going to do? Most powerful company in the world. That's the VOC. They're the DuPont of their time. And it says that the VOC won the right to trade in China by recognizing Chinese, you'll write down, cultural superiority. Cultural superiority. And I'm going to give you the best example. In this picture, there's something these men are doing to show honor and respect. What are they doing? They're bowing down, but like full on head to the floor, right? Now, in our culture, in Western American culture, if you meet someone and you want to show respect to them, you're in an interview or something like that, what are you going to do physically to show respect? Shake their hands, right? Well, not all cultures show respect in the same way. For the Chinese, there's this ritual called the kowtow, and you show respect by bowing down like this. Now, listen, if I said, starting tomorrow, I really think that we need to show more respect to Mr. Grammer, our principal. I want Mr. Grammer to be a guest tomorrow, and when he walks in the room, I want us to kowtow to him in respect. Would that be a normal and reasonable request? No. Like, for our culture, that's like a joke. No American's going to do that. And when white Europeans show up to China, they're like, hey, I want to respect you and all, but literally, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not gonna bow. That's humiliating for our culture. Most white people show up and say, we're not going to do that. And that kind of puts you on bad footing. If we took a field trip to Iran, what will all the women in this room have to wear to go day-to-day life in Iran? You have to wear some sort of head covering. And if you spend your time saying, well, I'm equal rights and I don't believe that, then your trip to Iran is not going to be very fun. The culture is just different. So when white people show up to China, the expectation is you kowtow, you bow down in respect. Most white people are like, no, I'm not going to do that. But the Dutch, though, the Dutch say, you're telling me if I put my head on the ground, we can have a business relationship and I've got money in my pocket, I'll bow down as low as you need me to go. If that shows you I respect your culture and we can have a relationship, because that takes me 30 seconds of putting my head on the ground and I've got a lifetime of profits in my pocket. How far do I need to go? Make sure you write down the kowtow is a symbol of respect. And of all the white European countries, only the Dutch were willing to put their pride and their culture and their qualms about respect to the side. And the Dutch said, we'll do whatever it takes to make this business relationship last. We're going to go ahead and stop there. We'll talk tomorrow about religious missionaries in China. There are going to be some